Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the lovely Kirsha Fox, author of Son of Deception and the newly released The White Leaf Child. She is an avid reader, homeschooling mom of four, and a gamer.
And my co host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to sprinkle magic on everything. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yes, and we're very excited to welcome our guest, Andrew Hood, on today. I'm so excited for this topic and conversation. You want to tell everyone a little bit about Andrew?
Yes, Andrew Hood has 4 books out right now. He has 3 works of fiction and 1 nonfiction. He's an IT veteran and he is published with Shawline Publishing Group.
Wonderful. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Kirsha. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's our pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your writing journey. What got you started in writing and why?
Well, I guess I started as a guitar player. I was a musician. I used to write songs, and writing songs is, every sort of word counts. So you got to be
Yes.
really quite careful. The wrong word just throws the whole thing out, or if you overwrite, the flow can change. So sort of started with songs, and then I sort of they were a bit fleeting, and I wanted to write something that might last. So
Mm.
I started to write longer form blog posts, and then I sort of came to the conclusion at some point that if I'd written so many blog posts that if I put a bunch of them together, it's actually the equivalent of a book. Uh,
Mhm.
and a friend of mine said, "Hey, the natural progression is you can now go and write a book." So I guess that was my writing progression from how I started writing to how I got to the longer form of writing of books. But it's sort of been step by step, bigger.
Right.
And we all know how. I mean, you're both authors, and I'm sure people listening are as well. We all know how daunting a book can be. I think if you
Right.
started to write a book before writing smaller chunks, you might struggle. It's a really tough thing to do.
Yeah, I would agree. Although I would say like songwriting is not the easiest thing for sure because I remember as a wee one in middle school writing crappy songs and like rhyming you with blue and two. You know what I mean? Like it was so I mean, granted I was in middle school, but it was still very juvenile. But there is something about the art of poetry and songwriting that I
Yeah.
really admire because like you said, it's being succinct and getting concisely your message across in very few words.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
and still
kudos
trying
to
to
you.
tell a story,
Right.
and have full rhyme
Mhm.
and flow, and still trying to tell an impactful story in those lyrics, those few lyrics. So
Right. Right. Yes. All right. So you have three works of fiction and one nonfiction. What genre do you usually write in and why?
yeah, I was in a team at work, and I was sort of leading a team. I wasn't managing a team, and I decided I wanted to learn as much as I could about leadership, and
Mm.
I knew nothing about it really. So one day, I mean, I don't tend to do things by halves, but one day I decided, well, I'm going to go and find out about the top 10 greatest leaders of all time. Who were they? What did
Mhm.
they do that was so amazing? And how could I learn from what they did for my job? What could I take from what they did? Things like Napoleon and Martin Luther King and all of these sorts of people, Catherine the Great. How do I why were they so special? Why does history
Mhm.
remember those people, and what could I take from them? So I wrote a book on leadership, um, and I think at the time, like 4 people bought that book, so it wasn't a
Right.
very well sold book, but it taught me a hell of a lot about leadership, and it wasn't till it taught me a few things. It taught me that I don't really like writing that sort of book, so I don't know
Mm.
if I'll do another nonfiction book. But it was a really good book because it sort of really crystallized in like 6 pages or less, who those people were, and about
Mm.
their lives, right? So it really helped me to learn the art of leadership. And it wasn't until many years later, actually just last year, that my publisher found out about it. The publisher of my nonfiction, of my fiction book, sorry, and said, "Hey, well, what's this?" And I said, "Oh, it's just a leadership book." He said, well, I want that. I want to get that out as an audiobook. Can I have the rights to that book? So it sort of came back and has been selling a lot better as an audiobook than it did as a book. But I've had to change the title a few times. I don't think people could quite understand if it was a history book or a leadership book or what it was.
Right.
It sort of confused people a little bit. But you know, I write fiction. I love my books. As you know, you're holding up your books as the woman who
Oh
stole the world, the man who corrupted heaven. So a few years later, as I said, I was writing blog posts, and you know, I started to sort of think, you know what, I was telling little stories of my life in those blog posts, and I thought, you know what, I could probably tell the story of someone's entire life
yeah.
just from the little stories in their life, right? So, and I ended up creating my first book, The Man Who Corrupted Heaven, which you know, which went on to sell quite well, and you know, and really set me up. But it was, you know, sort of halfway through that, I realized I was only ever going to write one book, you know, fiction book, and I
Right.
was like, oh no, this is going to be three books. So I
Right.
sort of halfway through realized, oh my gosh, this is a bigger project than I thought it was going to be. But I'm
Hmm.
so glad, you know, I've
Mhm.
great saying I read somewhere, you know, most people overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. And
Yeah.
10 years ago, for me to think that I would be sitting here with four books published is just, you know, I would never have considered that to be an option, you know, and yet here I am, and I'm, you know, so grateful that I
Yeah.
didn't get too daunted. Like if I'd sat down to write four books, I probably wouldn't have done it. But you know, I'm
Right.
really happy with the way it's turned out.
Hmm.
Yeah, and congratulations on finishing not just one book, but four. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, I can totally relate to that because I sat down to write one book and I was like, oh goodness, like it's too big. So I broke it up.
Right.
And then I published the second book. I'm like, it's still too big. So now I'm working on the third book. And it was all
Yeah,
supposed to be from that one book. It just got really
Mhm.
too
yeah.
much, too much plot.
Yeah, well, I had three characters make up that first book, and you know the character development was so strong. It's like I can't just leave these two
Mhm.
characters left. So in the end, I wrote one book for each character. So you know,
Mhm.
it
Yeah, yeah.
goes on from itself, but it's one book for
Oh,
each
that's
character.
a good way to do it.
That is
Yeah,
a really great way of doing it.
thank you, thank you.
All right. So what does your writing process look like then from idea to completion?
Well, it's messy. It's really messy. I termed it I'm a dirty writer. I don't think that sounds very good, but I,
Ah!
I am in that I not in my content, but in the way I go about it. So I write.
Mhm.
I don't sleep a lot, so I write late at night. I'm quite happy to do that. I work during the day, so you know I have to, you know, I have to work during the day, and I have
Mhm.
children, three children, so got to deal, you know, with them. Although they're getting older now, so they don't need
Mhm.
much, but I still want to be around, you know, and see them.
Yeah.
So I tend to write. I wrote a lot of the first book literally between 12 and 1 a.m. Right, that was sort of my hour of, you know, being able to get some things out, and so sort of that became my process. I guess that first book was really difficult because I didn't know what I was doing. You know, the
Mhm.
the, the nonfiction book was just like a research paper, so that
Right.
I don't even sort of consider that as writing, as more researching and presenting my ideas. But the fiction books, it's really difficult, like learning the things like how to get character names, you know, and how to
Mhm.
you know, how to go and I wanted to write a book that was not set in any particular place, so that, you know, somebody in the US could pick it up and say, hey, you know, it feels like it's next door, or somebody in Australia could do the same thing. And I didn't want it to be dated by technology, you know, so
Right.
I tried to take anything that could put it in a place or a time out of the book. I wanted it to sort of stand alone in any place and time.
Mhm.
And you know, maybe to a part I've done that, but you know, I'm sure some of it will date somehow. But um, you know, so it was really difficult. There's so many learning the craft for the first time is such a difficult thing. And then when
Mhm.
book two came about, I sort of wrote it quite quickly. You know, it became, you know, I knew the process. I knew how to get my names. I knew how to go and, you know, how to go and write about places, how to do my research, how to collect my information, because
Hmm.
I had to find it was, finding that, what did I call this the first time around? I've got to go and look through all, 20,000 words to find the name of
Right.
my gosh, I got a lot better at, holding little pockets of information. I use
Right.
Evernote, which is a wonderful tool for me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just dump everything in Evernote, and I've written 4 books in Evernote now. And I take it, I scratch out a chapter, and then I take it out of Evernote, and then use other tools and put it into Word and all of that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
that's where I capture my ideas.
Mm.
Okay, so it seems like you're very much digital rather than analog in how you're doing everything.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
type pretty quick, so it's good. I can get my ideas out fast.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you like to plot beforehand, or is it kind of you just sit down and see what happens?
I really wish that I could. I'm
Right.
desperate. I've bought the plotting tools. I've got the software. I've got all of this. I've got a whiteboard here that I like to think I use, but I actually just draw one thing and then leave it there forever.
Right.
Um, so I would love to be that organized. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in the last look, I do a little in that, I'll typically, have like a chapter title, something
Yeah.
happens in this chapter, but I don't do much more than that. And I just allow
Okay.
it, because what I found was I'll go and plot, and I've tried this a few times. I've plotted a whole bunch of stuff, and then
Mm.
I'll go and write 2 paragraphs, and already it's out of plot. Like I just tend to, I don't
Right.
write I just write and I follow the path that I write in, and I
Mm-hmm.
find that, in my first book, there's a twist in my first book around the halfway mark, and if I'd plotted, I would never have found that. Like that
Right.
was literally, it was like I wrote the words and went, oh my god, like I was
That's just a great feeling. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
know, right? And everybody that reads my books says, I didn't see that coming. So either did I, and I wrote it.
Right. Right.
So
It's called pantsing, but a lot of people have called it discovery writing. Just
discovery writing, right? I like that better, but I'm happy with pantsing
yes.
too.
Yeah. Right. Right. We're not picky about.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so I would love to be a lot more organized, but
Mm.
unfortunately, it sort of doesn't work for me that way. It works for me better
Right.
when I just discover as I go.
My sister's very similar. If she plots, she's like, "Now I know the story. I don't want to write it."
Yeah, right. I'm a bit like that too now. Now it's a chore, right? I don't want it to
Right.
be a
Right.
chore.
Yeah. She likes the discovering, so she just wants to keep discovering as she's writing. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Now, when we were discussing some different topics for the show, you did bring up that writing really helped you to get like through writing through your anxiety and depression.
Mm.
What struggles did you face writing and working through your anxiety and depression, and like what thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I like to talk about it because I know it's a hard topic to talk about. So
Yes.
I'm always happy to share my stories on this. When I first started my blog, it was called The Weekly Tipping Point. Now, I wanted it to be about tipping point moments in somebody's life or in my life when everything changed, where something happened, and then the way I thought about the world or myself or whatever from that point on changed. So I would literally just write, it was 2,500 word blog post about, something. And they started really silly, little, I think I was trying to impress people and make people laugh. Right? I don't
Mhm.
know. The first few blog posts were sort of not very interesting, maybe little funny anecdotes.
Mhm.
And then one day we have a day here called, I don't know if it's over there, but it's called Are You Okay Day. And it's like a mental health. You're supposed to check in on your friends. Hey, are you okay? Is everything going well? And just see how people are. So we had this Are You Okay Day. So I decided to write this. I've been going through a few things. We had some financial issues for a young family. We were, with
Mhm.
my young son, and my job was sort of not going well at the time, and we'd had a miscarriage followed by a health scare for my wife, and it was a really tough time in
Mhm.
my life, and I decided to write about that time. So I wrote a blog post about my, dealing with anxiety and depression, which I'd been through. I'd always had anxiety since a young age, but the depression
Mhm.
come in the result of some of these really, big things. And I was trying to sort of keep this from my wife, right? So I wasn't even telling her, what
Right.
sort of state
Right.
I was in, because she was in enough. I was trying not to burden her with all of that. I was trying to
Right.
keep that to myself. So one day I wrote this. I think I called it my tribute to Are You OK Day or something. Here's my story so that you can share.
Mhm.
What I didn't realize is the impact that story would have, right? So I put out a story. This is just one little thing that I've been dealing with. But I've been dealing with quite a bit, and just didn't go into it too much. And the impact of that one blog post, I don't know if Google found it or something. All of a sudden, I've gone from, getting, 13 friends read my blog
Right.
post to 2,500 people being shared multiple times. My blog got nominated for, oh gosh, what is it? Most inspirational blogs or something. It's one
Oh,
blog post.
yeah.
I mean, it went on to other things. That was just the start, um, but I shared this story, and all of a sudden people sort of come out of the woodwork. My friends are like, I'm going through that. Like gosh, I felt for you every step of the way.
Mhm.
I went into, just one little story, but, and then I got a phone call from my sister saying, Mum's pretty upset. She's worried about you. You better give Mum a call. She was
Mm.
in tears. It sort of sparked into this big thing. But it had an impact, my writing
Mhm.
for the first time ever had an impact, and people wanted to talk to me. People, I don't know how, but I became an expert on anxiety and depression.
Right.
People wanted to share. I was like a counselor all of a sudden, and I didn't know anything. I was still dealing with my own issues.
Right.
So I sort of became this spokesperson for it all of a sudden. And all I was doing is not helping anybody else, in that I was just sharing my story, and people
Mm.
love to hear that story, and it sort of helped them realize, hey, I'm not alone,
Yes.
that other people are going through things. So what it then did is I then went and started to share different stories, and people really sort of connected with that, started to write for other people. But then, like I said before, it's sort of, if it occurred to me, if I can talk about one little story that changed my life,
Mhm.
then maybe I could tell a person's entire life story by a collection of 12 things that happened to that person, or nine. I could really
Right.
give a good sense of who the main character was. And in The Man Who Corrupted Heaven, my first book, um, it's told on his deathbed as flashbacks for his life,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
All these 12 tipping point moments, as I've called them,
Mhm.
those moments that changed, that made him who he was. And I
Right.
think the thing that came back, or the thing that I never set out to write, but it became a book about perspective. Because a lot of those
Mm.
moments, when he saw them from a different perspective, from his, after death perspective, were very different to how he perceived them in real life. In real
Right.
life, he was living those moments, but when he has perspective on them, they're all quite different to how he remembered it. So yeah, I turned out just sort of to write a book about a man. I ended up writing a book about perspective, and
Right.
people seem to really enjoy that book. Like, there's something unique about it. I think that, even in the next two books, I sort of set myself an impossible task with every book. But
Right.
with that book, I think my impossible task was that I wanted to write something completely unique. And I think people have been a bit shocked by it. It was like, this is not a book I was expecting to read. So I think I've done
Mhm.
something right. It's been nominated for a few awards. I haven't won anything, but lots
Well,
of books.
congratulations, though. Nominations
Yeah,
are big. Yeah.
yeah, they're good for. Yeah, they make you feel good. They make you feel good. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
No,
all
I
right through.
I love that story, and I love that you shared what you were going with through. I wish we had celebrated a day like that here, unfortunately, we don't have a Are You Okay Day, but one of the things about depression and anxiety is it's so like insidious, like where how isolating it is and how it makes you feel like you are alone or you can't share your burden because you don't want to burden someone else. Like you said, with your wife was going through enough and you didn't want to make her even feel worse. And
Yeah.
but by sharing your story, like you said, you helped other people realize they weren't alone. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's really the power and why it's so important to talk about mental health and
Yeah.
share those struggles. And your story sounds fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The novel idea of taking these tipping points in someone's life and sharing them and then having the bigger theme of perspective, like that just sounds fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed philosophy at the time. It was
Hmm.
helping me deal with some of these things, and yeah, it was quite funny. I upset a lot of people though. I mean, my
Oh
first
no.
book title was The Man Who Corrupted Heaven, and I upset some Christian people. I got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
hate online. I got called all sorts of names, and I really went very hard to write a book that was not religious. Like
Right,
this
right.
could be any heaven. Like I know heaven, is a term that is used in certain religions, but I've written it in a way it's an after death place as opposed to a you know
Right, right.
a God and angels type situation. It's almost like a bureaucracy where nobody really knows what's going on, and
Right.
one level's not talking to the other level,
Mm.
Um, so I really worked very hard, but I think the title alone seemed to upset some people. So I did receive,
Right.
I was yelled at in shopping centres when I did book signings, and so I copped a lot. But you know what? That's okay. People. I think the title being quite strong, people were intrigued as well. So I probably sold
Right.
a bunch of copies on the back of the strength of the title, but it
Right.
certainly did upset some people.
Mhm. I love how you took something that was very personal to you, this
Mhm.
pain that you held, and you transformed it into something true that other people will resonate with.
Right.
Yeah, and for one or two of those things, I went and saw a psychologist, right? So,
Mm.
and I remember a few things. The psychologist saying to me, I said, "Oh, these are my secrets. I carry these. These are my secrets." And she said, "No, no, Andrew. In our profession, there is a saying which is you are only as sick as your secrets." Right? So,
Mm.
the more secrets you have, the more you bottle up inside, and that's that. So, it made me think about that. And but the other thing is, you know, if you think about those moments when you have this situation, like I used to get quite anxious around loud noises, and I could never quite figure out why I couldn't. And it turned out it was something that happened when I was a child. But every time there was a loud noise, I wasn't thinking about it like a rational adult, right? It was the
Mm.
child that
Right.
had that
Right.
issue was coming. So I was thinking about it like a child. So when I started to do the writing, when my character's in a difficult situation or something anxious sort of situation, they don't always like I think writers often, write about it like an adult or I was
Mm.
writing about it
Mhm.
like a child who had experienced something and the adults trying to work through the situation. So it sort of gave me a perspective, and I think it sort of gave my writing a bit of a depth, that maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through that process.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Do you have any like tips you would have for other authors who struggle with mental health but who also want to write or channel that into their writing somehow?
Yeah, look, you know, I a few people have asked me about, how do you go about writing? And I've said to them, hey, just write about something that happened in your life,
Mhm.
use all of the emotion that you felt and put it into words, right? Write it down. And then you're going to have to show somebody, like,
Mhm.
writing something and not showing somebody, it's worthless because you haven't had any
Right.
feedback, so, you sort of got to start somewhere. So I always ask people, it's hard to write with emotion about a character you've just made up if you can't write with emotion about yourself. So
Yeah.
I think, my tip is, learn your craft writing about yourself and what you know, and then you can then bring it to your characters and start to write
Mm.
them
Mhm.
in that same emotional way.
That's a really great tip. I love that idea of just practicing with your story before you try to apply everything that we feel for our characters in a fictional world. Yeah, that's a really great tip.
Yes, I often like to think that you break off little bits of yourself and put them inside your characters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
J.K. Rowling, I think she has this concept. Was it the Horcrux? I think where you break a splinter of your soul and put it into something.
Right.
I love that concept. I've done that in every one of my books. There's a small part of me in my fiction books. In my non-fiction books, it was just a piece of work, and that's I
Right.
guess that's why I didn't enjoy that process as much. I mean, it was a good book.
Right.
It certainly teaches people about leadership, but I didn't feel like I had a part of me in that book. Maybe the really
Right.
good non-fiction authors do. I'm sure they do, but
We've often said that fiction allows us to frame like real truths in a way that nonfiction cannot. It holds up a mirror.
Oh no, it's just a completely different beast when you're doing nonfiction. There's like rules and etiquette to follow as far as like telling the truth in a true way, whereas fiction you have the ability to just simply tell truth without worrying about those kind of etiquettes and things to follow that people expect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you don't always know what your book's going to be about. Like,
Right.
like I said, that first book, I finished it and I realized it's about, it's about perspective, right? My second book I thought was going to be about anger, and it turned out to be a book about fear. Like, so
Right.
quite interesting. And so my third book again was different again. It was about control, about having control. It's about a woman who had no control her whole life, and just one time before she died, she wanted to have control.
Right. Right.
Men had controlled her whole life, and she just wanted to one time feel like she had the world in her hands. So so that was it was between the three books it's been, what is it, perspective, fear, and control. So,
Yeah.
so
I think
that's my system now.
That's awesome though, because I'm not surprised when you said anger turned into fear. It makes complete sense though, because a lot of times anger is a secondary emotion, right? Because we feel something else and we respond with the anger because that's safer or easier to access than like what's really going on under the surface to cause the angry reaction. So I love how you kind of discovered that through the story as well.
Yeah, it was interesting, that second book, because like I said, I sort of give myself these impossible tasks, and then I just try and make it happen. Like that first book, I wanted it to sit, alongside any of my favorite authors ever on the shelf, and have its own weight, like its own sort of. The second book, I wanted it to be, it's a confession. So it's literally as you are a priest and you are hearing this confession from my second character, and it's like he doesn't take a breath. Like this is his, as if he was just talking to you straight for 2 or 3 hours. This is the way it's written. And I wondered, can I actually get away with writing one stream of thought? And I finally pulled it off, and I think I did it pretty good.
Maybe Faulkner got away with it, so you should be able to, right?
Yeah, right. So I was like, can I do this? I don't know if I can do this. And the third book was I wrote it as it's a fictional true crime podcast. I just listened to this, and the funny thing happened is, as I was listening to the podcast, I started to hear my characters and their stories with the voices of the people on that podcast. Like I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a podcast. So I wrote it as a podcast, and I think readers reading it go, wow, I really struggled with this like the first few pages, but when your brain slips into it, it's wonderful. They really enjoyed. They started to hear the voices in different accents and different things, and it's been good when I spoke to a few people. They said, "Oh, this character, she's American, right? And this one's Irish." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not the way I had it, but whatever you hear is great."
Right. Oh, that's fantastic that you have kind of that universality to your characters, that you can really like find, whoever you want in them.
I think it can be frustrating for my readers in that if you love one of my books, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like the rest.
Right.
Even though they're 3 books in a series, they're very different. Like, each book has one's a true crime, one's almost like a philosophy, sort of book. Another one's a confession, a thriller confession.
Mhm.
So they all work in really well, and they tell the story of each individual character who is different. So it's not like I'm telling one character like James Bond and it's.
Right,
But,
right.
but I think I sort of don't want people to love every book. I want someone to find their favorite book in one of mine.
Mm,
If I
right.
can get, and sometimes I hear that, this is my new favorite book ever, and
Mhm.
love that. Like that is just such a wonderful.
Yeah.
I hope every author hears that at least once, because
Right,
Best book
right.
in the world. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. It is a really great feeling. Um, what do you think is the most important part of writing?
Um,
We bring the heavy hitters over here.
yeah, yeah. Uh, So I'm gonna reframe this in that I'm gonna say I don't actually like writing. Somebody said to me,
Okay.
"You must really like writing." I hate writing. I cannot think of any better way to get a book out of my head onto the page other than writing it, unfortunately. And I'm certainly not
Right.
gonna use AI. I tried AI and it didn't work. I don't want AI writing books for me.
Right,
Um,
right.
um, but so the craft is not something I sit down with a big smile on my face and do.
Mm,
Like something I really grin and bear through each individual word. It's difficult for me. I don't, but I enjoy the finished product. And I enjoy.
mm,
I sometimes, I once said I don't know what my thoughts are until I write them down and I
right.
craft. And so these books are ways for me to craft my thoughts. So I think what I'd say is it's never perfect. It's always ugly,
Mm,
you but you've just got to get it out. Get version one out. And then maybe, I had a lot of help on my first book because I wrote it and then I thought, I before I even showed it to my wife, so 5 years I worked on that book. And in that time I didn't show anybody, didn't show my wife. She probably got sick of hearing me talk about it, but I certainly never showed her. But then I went to a like a coach, like a book coach, um, a developmental editor, and I said, "Here is
mhm.
my," and she said, "Oh, okay." And I paid for that service because I wanted that even before I gave it to a publisher, I wanted it to be right.
Right.
So we then went through, we cleaned a bit of it up. I had to rewrite a little bit here or there, not much, but I had to do some rewriting.
Mhm.
Um, I then went through, and she was wonderful. This developmental editor. I then went through a copy editor who was terrible. um,
Mhm.
I was convinced that I had to use this named copy editor. She'd worked on some. I won't say the books because I don't want to sort of give away who she was, but
Mm.
she said to me day one, "I don't like your book. I
Oh
will do
no.
my
Yeah.
job. I will do my job, and I will give you the best copy edit I can. But your book insults me. I don't like it." So I think
Oh,
maybe she was one of these. You know, she was
offended
a
by the title. Mhm.
Kevin title or whatever. But she did a good job. I fought with her on one word that I wanted to keep that she didn't like, and all of that. But it was the right word for the story, and I still stand by it.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, but so I had my first one was really encouraging. I love this story. This is
Right.
amazing.
Right.
So glad you wrote this. This is unique. And then the second one was like, I hate your book. I don't like it.
Yeah.
But here is the finished product. And you know what?
Right.
Both of those edits made the book better. And then when I finally gave it to someone, because we all want to give our work away. Like, I wanted to give that to someone when I'd done chapter one. And the
Right.
amount of people who have given me their first chapter and said, "What do you reckon? Is it a good book?" And I go, "Well, it's not a book. It's just a few pages so
Chapter
far."
1. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what happens is you can get that dopamine of somebody saying, "Ah, great work, keep it up," and then you don't
Right.
have to rest. It's like I can write, like.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so for me, it was, don't show it to anybody. But the good thing is, when I finally showed it to people, they were like, "Oh wow, okay, this is a
Mhm.
serious book." They didn't see all the work; they just saw the end product.
Right.
So what I'd say is don't expect it to be nice. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a mess. Get
Mhm.
help. Go and get some help to help. Book 2 and 3 flowed quite lovely. After that first ugly book one. You
Experience.
know,
Mhm.
yeah. But and so I only needed minimal help in books 2 and 3. I didn't use a developmental editor. It was really just a copy editor in the end.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but don't expect it to be, especially in a first book.
Right.
First books, you're learning the craft. You're still learning. So yeah, just expect it to be ugly. Get help, and don't show it to people too soon. So if you can
Okay.
get it finished. Is my tip.
Right. Always get it finished is the goal. I encourage a lot of people to do short stories if they struggle to finish a project because you learn so much just in the act of finishing, in the art of finishing something. And so that can be a really great way of practicing short form, like you said earlier in the show, and then moving on to the novels and stuff like
Well,
Mhm.
if
that.
you wanted to, I mean, that's how I sort of did that first book, right? They were short stories in that just
Hmm.
different parts of the person's life. So I could have stopped
Right.
anywhere and I had these elements I could have used, but in the end it was good because I put them all together. So
Yeah, yeah. That's great. Now, do you prefer a plot based or a character based story?
it's all character. I think the problem for me with plot based is you run the risk of trying to be too clever. Like,
Mm.
for me, whenever I think, "Oh, I have this incredible plot, it's gonna be amazing, it's gonna be amazing," and I forget about the characters. And you know what? It's the characters and the character for me, it's the character's pain, or challenge, that makes people wanna keep reading, you know? But, my characters aren't particularly nice. Like, it's funny, somebody said, yeah, in a review on Amazon, "Man, I don't really like any of these characters, but they're so compelling, like, I just wanna
Mhm.
read about them." And it sort of made me think, "Wow, they're not that nice." But
Mm.
maybe nice is boring. Maybe people don't want to read about nice. Maybe people want to read about flawed characters who
Mhm.
went through something when they were children, and have had to deal with it their whole life, from that point
Yeah.
on. So I think for me, it's got to be about character.
Yeah, I would agree. I always fall in love with the characters over what's happening in the book. And for me, knowing my characters' motivations helped me determine the plot in the first place.
Yeah,
Because when you know what the characters want and why, then that's going to tell you what happens in the story too.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
certainly there are some amazing books on plot, like,
Right.
uh, you know, I remember reading the Da Vinci Code and, what a ride that was back in the day, and
Right.
some of these other plot-based books, it's like, wow, this is happening and that's happening, and it's all right. But
Right.
I don't write that way, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt like with
Using
even
your
with the
own voice for sure. The story that is inside you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you just gotta
Right.
tell your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Um.
I completely agree on writing characters who are not always likable.
Yes.
There's a series
Right.
that I'm in love with right now, and like there's several times where I close the book and just I'm so mad at these characters for what they're doing and how awful they're being. But then I keep reading because I need to know
Really?
what
Right.
next. And I think that there's books that are just meant to be sugary and light and fluffy because that's
Yeah.
what
Mhm.
you need. But then there are those grittier, darker books that again are going to hold up a mirror and show you things that you
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to look at always.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's my second book, right? The challenge was, how can I write a book about a guy who was a brute, who liked to
Mm.
hurt people, and make the audience want to learn about him. And
Right.
it was
Right.
it was in, it was like I said, it was supposed to be in anger and all his anger, and in the end, you find out it's just in fear. Like he's so scared of what happened to him when he was younger. He's determined that he's going to make people pay for what happened to him, and it's all based
Mm.
on what
Mhm.
happened. So all of a sudden you go from thinking, oh, this guy's just hurting people to actually no, there's something going on. And in the
Right.
end, you feel for him. And it was a real challenge. And I had to go and do research. How do I get an audience to fall for the bad guy? You know?
Right. Right.
But it was great. There's some amazing books of terrible characters who, you just can't stop reading. You just
Right,
want to know.
right. And I really think that, like, perfect characters are so boring anyways, right? They're always gonna win, right? So why do we need to read about them? It's much better
Yeah,
to read about
I
flaws.
want this guy to be a mess. So
Right,
he
right.
was a mess. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So who is your favorite author and what do you think they do best?
It changes so much, over the years. But I've got two or three really that I really enjoy. Really like Paulo Coelho. His books, The Alchemist, and some
Hmm.
of those books. I remember reading The Alchemist, and I really enjoyed that. I've given it to my son because I wanted him to read it as well. But then I went and read every book he wrote, and I really liked the philosophy that he brings to his books. Um, there's an American writer, Mitch Albom, who did
Hmm.
Tuesdays with Morrie and The Five People You Meet in Heaven.
Yes.
Just loved him. I read his first book. I think what I loved about him is his books are quite thin. Like they're not
Hmm.
heavy, but he packs incredible punch into
Right.
those thin books. He writes so simply. It's not a prose that goes too deep. I can
Hmm.
understand heavy concepts in a light in a light way.
Right, right.
I think I've got his books hanging up next to me, but that's
Yeah.
what I liked. That taught me that it can be done. I can
Hmm.
write about big things, and I don't need to have big words. And I don't know
Right,
too many
right.
big words. I'm just trying to sort of tell a story, but it sort of made it accessible for me
Hmm.
reading his work. And there was another one, and let me just. His name is. It's just gone, but it wasn't written in English. It was called. Oh my gosh, I've had a blank. But he's died now, unfortunately. But anyway, he wrote these books, and I'm not quite sure I always understood what was happening
Hmm.
in those books, but the beauty in which he wrote, and I was just taken away into another world, and it
Hmm.
really showed me that you could sort of you could write with beauty and capture somebody and take them away. And I don't write like him, but I really admired his writing style. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
between those three writers, I sort of came up with my style.
Okay.
All right.
Mm. But then I love Dean Kuntz and Stephen King
Yeah.
and
Right.
some of these other writers. I'm reading at the moment? Babel, which is just
Yeah, yeah.
super popular online. Everybody's talking
Yeah.
about it, so I better go and check it out. I really enjoyed that. And I'm reading a sci-fi which was recommended to me called Snow Crash. I'm always sort of got one audio, one written book.
Right. And the
I go through the audio books much faster than I read. I
yes,
don't
yes,
have
yes.
the amount of time to read, but I love audio books. There's always one going.
I
Hmm.
find that no matter what the genre or what the story is about, every author has something to teach you. Every
Absolutely.
Hmm.
every life you live through these characters, you learn
Right.
something.
Yeah, absolutely, Keisha.
Absolutely.
Every time I read a book, I think, oh, I like that. I might
Right. Let me steal that. And
borrow that.
right. Well, after all, creativity is just the art of stealing, right? But stealing
Absolutely.
well,
It
right?
is, and
Hmm.
reuse, right? Like hearing that
Yeah.
podcast and then suddenly hearing my own characters in those voices, right? And then it gave me
Which is
the
kind of
ability
like a
to write.
modern day epistolary. That's like, which is such a fascinating idea. Is instead of
Yeah,
doing it through like journals or newspaper articles and writing, you do it through a podcast. I love that. Yeah.
yeah. And I think people that listen to podcasts just love it.
Hmm.
People that don't are the ones that struggle with it in the
Right.
early pages, and then
Because
they
they're
go,
not
"Oh, I
familiar
think
with
I
the
get it now. I get it."
format. Yeah.
Whereas people that listen to podcasts every day go, "Oh, I'm in my world here." This.
Yeah. Right. I should tell my sister about that book because she loves to listen to podcasts. So
Yeah.
she'd love that. Yeah.
If she likes true crime podcasts, she'll
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So, if you had advice for a new author
Mhm.
just starting out, what would you tell them? You touched on that a little bit as you've gone through your own journey, but what would
Yeah.
be that one solid thing that they must know?
Yeah, I said once that right? And it's probably not the helpful advice, but I said writing a book is like running 2 marathons back to back, and in the middle going, I don't even like running. Like, what am I doing? I, you know,
Right.
but it was, to me, it is just such a long process, and
Mhm.
and I would say you've really got to want to get it done. It's like I said, my first book took 5 years. I would hope that, uh, you know, if you really put some time to it, and it got quicker
Right.
from there. So in 5 years, 2 years, 1 year. Um,
Mhm.
but it's going to be some work. Like, you really got to,
Right.
don't think you're just going to have one little burst of energy and get through it. Like,
Mhm.
and I admire the ones that do. There are some that write books in a couple of weeks. Like,
Right.
that's amazing. That's fantastic. I really wish I could do that, but I can't.
Right.
Um, but I want my books to be around for years too, so I don't want to rush it. I want to take
Mhm.
the right amount of time. Um, but I think you got to realize that it's not just going to be something that one little sit down is going to you're going to have to devote time and resources to this. So you've
Mhm.
really got to know, this is something I really want to do. Like, I would
Right.
take it rationally, as opposed to just thinking, hey, one day I'd like to write a book and here's a page. You know,
Right.
I really wish it was more encouraging. I wish it was, hey, just write the first few lines and the rest will take care of itself. But
Right. Right.
that's how, first few pages are written. That's not how books are written, right?
Right. Right. It's definitely playing the long game for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
yeah. Yeah.
not a fast game.
I'm going to get a much better answer to that, because it sounds like nobody would want to write a book. But, unfortunately, that's
Yeah.
the truth. Yeah.
And yet we are compelled anyway. We
Yeah.
must
Right.
Yeah.
write.
So you've got to have that sort of feeling. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, you have to have the compulsion for sure. I think that too, it's like, anything that's worth doing is not going to be super easy
Well,
as
that's it.
well.
And you know
Mhm.
what? For the rest of my life, I'll have these books,
Yes.
and I'll be able to give them to my children. Anybody that ever wishes to read them. Like, I still get, I wrote my first book, years ago, but I probably started it 10 years ago. Yet people
Mm.
are still picking it
Right.
up in
Right.
libraries in Tasmania, or getting it in France, or I actually sell more copies in the US than I do in Australia, probably by about,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
you know, 90% of my books are sold in the US. In Australia, I don't sell that many.
Mhm.
But a few people are starting to hear from me, all with
Yeah, yeah.
awards and things like that. But and then I get book sales in France and Belgium, and it's just amazing.
Mhm.
Amazon, it really, you can love or hate Amazon, but because of Amazon, I have 3 books, and I'm able to sell them in every country around the world.
Yes.
Pretty
Yes.
amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah, just the reach that we have as a global community nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, how do you deal with writer's block?
Uh, it's uh, it's really got to me a couple of times.
Mhm.
Like I said in that first book, where I talked about the 2 marathons, there was a bit in the middle there where I just couldn't write. I just couldn't
Mm.
write a
Mhm.
word. Everything I wrote, I just then would, delete, and it was just, I didn't know where my story was going, because I don't plot, right? So I didn't know. I just sort of written myself off a cliff. And then maybe for 2, 3 months, I didn't write anything. And then I thought, man, I've spent so much effort to get here. Am I just going to stop
Mhm.
here? Like, this is crazy. So I remember one day I just took stock. What do I have?
Mhm.
What do I have to work with? And I would go,
Right.
well, I have this and I have that, and this guy knows this, and I have that. So I then just come up with this list of elements. And I said before, when I have this plot twist that nobody saw coming and I didn't see coming, that came because of that process, right? All of a sudden
Oh,
they went,
okay.
oh my God, I could make
Yeah.
this happen to that. And then I put it into the page, and the second half of the book just went, whoof, it just
Right, right.
came.
You got
So
them. It all came out.
it all came. So then I think if you're stuck, you don't know where to go, just take stock. What do I
Mhm.
have?
Mhm.
What do I have to work with here? Uh,
Right.
And the next time I did come up with writer's block, I did that, and I just said, okay, what have I got? And literally within a week, I was back. Like, it
Yeah.
only held me back for a short term. But yeah, I didn't know what to do. That first time was a terrible feeling.
It is a terrible feeling. But that's amazing advice, is just take stock of what is already happening in the story that you know you have, and then try to
Yeah,
figure out where to go. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I love that advice.
What would you say has been your most significant writing victory so far?
Um, I think I think even when you've got a book and your wife or husband tells you it's a good book, or
Mhm.
and maybe a few close friends tell you it's a good book, you don't really know. You sort
Right.
of think, am I just being like, I could choose to know. I could choose to go, that's all I need. I'm great.
Mhm.
This is fantastic. But it's not until people you don't know read the book and tell you,
Mm.
hey, this book sucks, or hey, this is a great book,
Mhm.
that you
Right.
really get it. So I think for me, I got a publisher. It turned them up. It was not a great experience. My first publisher, but my second publisher was amazing.
Yeah.
And then I started to see some reviews on my book, and it was getting, I think it was 4.3 stars or something on Amazon, and I was getting these comments. Hey, this is my new favorite book of all time. Like,
Oh,
and
yeah,
this
yeah.
book changed my life, or this book helped me get through a really bad part in my life, or and I started to read some, and maybe you shouldn't read reviews, because I certainly had a couple of 1-star reviews. This book is trash. Get it out of my life.
Right, right.
But when I started to read some of those reviews, I thought, hey, I think I've created something good here. Something that I might want to be, because you know what, I was almost going to use a pen name. I'm so glad I didn't use a pen name. Like, can you imagine if I put somebody else's name on that book? Like, uh,
Mhm, mhm.
I want to be proud of this book. I'm personally
Right,
proud
right.
of this book. But I think I was embarrassed. If it's no good, do I want it? Maybe I'm embarrassed. So I'm glad I put my name. I'm not saying
Right.
there isn't room for pen names. There absolutely is. But for me, I'm glad that I had my name on this book, because
Right,
I'm
right.
pretty proud of it in the end.
Yeah, congratulations again. It's there's no greater feeling than when you're holding a book that you wrote in your hands, like, I made
Absolutely.
this. Yeah.
I totally feel you on the unbiased opinions of strangers who come to you and say they really loved it. You appreciate every review,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it's those people you don't know who are reinforcing that you did something good, that you did
Mhm.
something meaningful, that meant something to them.
Yeah.
That's definitely a huge writing victory.
Yes,
So great,
yes.
because they don't owe you anything.
Right, right.
Mm.
They need to spare your feelings. Yeah,
Yeah. They
exactly.
don't even
Yeah.
need to reach out and say thanks. They could have just put the book on the shelf, right? But they've
Right, right.
gone to an effort to write a review or say thank you. It's
You're
wonderful.
definitely braver than I am, because I have a pretty thick skin when it comes to writing and getting criticism and critique, but I refuse to read reviews.
Do you?
Um, yeah, just because it's like, why would I want to ruin my day if someone just randomly put a bad review out?
They
I just.
do. They do, and they write, oh, you know, it's funny because at first, somebody said, I don't like the way you
Mhm.
write about women. And I left it after the first chapter. And I'm like, man, that's the worst time to leave it, because you're right.
Right,
My first chapter's terrible, but
right.
not terrible, but that woman character becomes the linchpin of the whole entire trilogy. Like, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
she was the most important. But if you only read the first chapter, I can understand you thinking maybe didn't,
Right.
but she the one
Character growth. You haven't hit the growth yet.
haven't
Yeah,
done
yeah.
anything. So I
Yes.
sort of go, oh, that's a shame that you felt that way. And I just say
And
thank
gave
you for
up.
reading
Yeah,
my book.
yeah.
So thank you for reading my book. But so there's some, but you can't help that. Like, they're going to
Yeah.
go. What is that? I said to somebody once. It took me 5 years to write this book and get it edited and pay all the resources to do all of that.
Mhm.
And it took someone 7 seconds to write this book sucks, 1 star. You know?
Right.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like anyone who gets a bad review, myself included, we're in good company, right? Because you can look up the classics that are loved and adored by millions of
I like
people,
that.
and there will be
Yeah.
someone who is like, "This is the stupidest book in the world," So I just don't.
So
For my
true.
peace of mind, I don't bother to look.
So true. Yeah.
Yes. Now, for our last question, it's
Mm.
my favorite question, but is there writing advice that you hate?
Or at least maybe wasn't helpful for you.
Right.
I had this book. I wish I could remember the name of it. I think it's upstairs in a pile of books somewhere, but
Mhm.
it was like 101 unconventional writing tips.
Right. Okay.
It was something like that, and it literally said, forget writing about things you don't know, or write about things you know was the tip, and it said forget that. Nobody wants to read your story. They want to read something that's
Mm.
amazing. Yeah, and you may not have lived that. So, but I
Right.
think for me, I sort of I throw out the rule book because not that I'm this big rebel or anything, but
Right.
because I'm trying to write something unique, right? And you can
Mhm.
only do that. You got to know the rules, but then you sort of want to be able to sort of forget about them too. I think if there's writing, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I would just say just write. Just write what you want to write because you're going to read
Mm.
it 40 times, 50 times.
At least,
You're
yes.
gonna be so sick of that bloody book by the time you finish. But if
Yes.
it's not something you don't write that you don't like, then it's going to be a chore. It's going to be,
Write
Yes.
what you want to read because you will be reading it.
oh
You
my,
will read
Over and over.
over and over and over.
oh, here's a new edit. Yeah, oh my God, I got to read it again. Okay, here we go.
Right. A lot of authors say that editing is their least favorite part of writing,
Oh,
partly
I hate it.
because they have to read it again
I have no attention to detail, so for me to edit,
Right.
I've got to hold my eyes open and I've got to sort of force myself to
Clockwork
read.
Orange moment where
Yes.
get putting in the eye drops and just watching
Yeah,
the
because
screen.
I'll just skip, like I speed read, I just want the story.
Yeah.
But when you're editing, oh my God, I sort of comma go here or there. Who cares? I don't care. Like, but you got to care because it's going to be in print forever. And the last
Yes.
Right.
one is
And you're
great
gonna get
book.
that 1-star review that says the
Yeah,
commas weren't in the right space.
great book, but his comma was in the wrong spot. 1 star, like.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh
my poor
goodness.
wife, she's become my first round editor. I sort of give it to her. But now there's some amazing tools, right? I use ProWriting Aid, which helps me a little bit. Also gets me confused at times because I don't always agree and I
Well,
can't understand
right.
why they want to put a comma there instead of there. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
But it means you can get it much cleaner, quicker. Like
Mm-hmm.
but you can't let it. What I do is I turn it off until I'm finished the chapter.
Yes.
And
Yes.
now I used to wait till the end of the book before I went back and edited, but I
Mhm.
don't want to wait because it's too big a chore now. So now I do
Oh,
it at the
okay.
end of the chapter. I go back, clean it up, and use ProWriting Aid and do the thing. It used to be
Try to break up that job a little bit so it doesn't crush you.
just a little bit, right? For sure.
Right.
Um, and so that when you read it back after you finished, you actually have something you can read.
Mhm.
Makes it a
Mhm.
little bit nicer. Those tools
Yeah.
make it easier now.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you
I
start reading and you're like, this is actually pretty good. And then you're like,
Right.
oh no, I was reading. I have to go back and start over. I was supposed to be editing.
Yeah. Oh my
That's
gosh.
right. Reading versus editing.
That is like the testament. I'm an editor as well. So like when I'm editing someone's work and I tell them like I'll let the author know like your book's so good I started reading instead of working, So like that's my hallmark of a good book is when you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be editing this. I'm just reading what happens. Yeah.
Is it easier to edit someone else's work, Julia, than your own?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. I love editing other people's stories. I hate editing my own. Like
Yeah.
I
Okay.
hate it
Not
as
so
much
bad.
as other authors do. But when I'm working on someone else's story, it's so easy because it's like it's fresh, it's new. I'm not slogging through the 100th read of my own story that I wrote. And yeah, it's so much easier to like polish up someone else's diamond, right, than your
Mm,
own that you've been
yeah.
working and grueling over for months or years, so
I've had so many great editors. I've had one bad one, but the rest
yes,
of it,
yes,
amazing, really
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
And, I really have appreciated their work every time.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love editing. I get to say like my job is reading stories, how
Yeah,
what a hard life I live.
absolutely.
Yeah. But we do want to give you an opportunity to tell us where we can find you online and learn more about you and your book. So,
Sure.
where
So,
can we
look,
find
I
you
think
online?
I'm probably best on
Feel free to show
Facebook.
us those covers.
Yeah, show us the covers.
Oh, the covers. Okay, yep. The first book, I don't know if it's coming as Mira, The Man Who Corrupted
Yeah.
Heaven. Is that coming backwards?
No, that's
Anyway,
perfect.
okay, good. The second book is The Man Who Settled the Score. Uh,
Ooh.
yeah, that's that one. And the third book is The Woman Who Stole the World. That's the most recent one. That's coming out in hardback. I'm really excited about that. My publisher said, hey, we've had good sales on that, so we want to release a hardback copy of that. So I'm
Oh,
really excited.
nice.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I've got an audio book coming out for The Man Who Corrupted Heaven. So lots of things in progress. I'm probably more on Facebook. So if you want to
Mhm.
look at Andrew Hood Author on Facebook, it's probably the best place. I tried TikTok, but I'm just not right for not right.
Right, right.
But,
TikTok is tricky.
it
Yes.
is.
TikTok
It
is hard.
is. And not really on Instagram. I'm a little bit, but not much. Really,
Mhm.
the Facebook is where I used to do little videos and things. I've got to start doing those again. That's
Mhm.
where I can sort of be myself a little bit more, I think. So
Yeah, yeah.
come and follow me, please do. Come on Facebook is probably the way to find me best.
Sure. Do you have a website?
I do. AndrewHoodAuthor.com, I think it is.
Wonderful. Yeah. So everyone should go check Andrew Hood out on his website, learn a little bit more about the books that he created. And thank you so much for being our guest tonight. It was an absolutely wonderful conversation.
Oh,
I loved
thank
every minute.
you. Thank you for having me on your show, Julia Kirsch. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. This is great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Be sure to check out our next episode, which comes out on Friday. And remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. And if you're interested in being a guest on our show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thank you very much for joining us and have a great week.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.